The stars burned cold in the Andromeda Galaxy, their light barely touching the massive ships that moved between them like silent giants. These ships belonged to the Kethver Empire, and they had been the rulers of space for over 3,000 years. No one could stop them. No one had ever tried. The Kethver were not like humans. They stood 12 feet tall, their bodies covered in hard, crystal-like skin that sparkled in the starlight. Their eyes glowed with a blue fire, and they could speak to each other without words, their thoughts traveling from mind to mind like whispers in the dark. They had conquered 17 different galaxies, turning entire star systems into dust when they met resistance. War Commander Zethkal stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Dominion. The ship was the size of a small moon, its black hull covered in weapons that could tear reality apart. Behind him, dozens of other ships followed, each one carrying the power to destroy worlds. They had just finished conquering the Spiral Arm Galaxy, adding another billion worlds to their empire. "The next galaxy awaits," Zethkal said to his officers, his voice echoing in their minds. "The scouts report another collection of primitive worlds. This should take no more than a few cycles." The Kethver had perfected the art of war. Their ships existed partly in normal space and partly in a hidden dimension, making them nearly impossible to hit. Their weapons could reach through shields and armor as if they were made of air. When they wanted to destroy a planet, they simply erased it from existence, leaving nothing but empty space where it once spun. Meanwhile, in the Milky Way galaxy, Captain Jake Sullivan was having a much quieter day. His ship, the USS Defiance, was patrolling the outer rim when the emergency signal came through. The sound was harsh and broken, cutting through the peaceful hum of the ship's engines. "Captain, we're getting a distress call from Research Station Omega-7, said Lieutenant Sam Torres from his position at the communications console. "The signal is weak, but it sounds urgent." Jake stood up from his command chair, his brown hair catching the light from the overhead panels. He had been in space for 15 years, but he had never heard a distress call quite like this one. There was something in the static that made his skin crawl. "Put it through," he ordered. The main screen flickered to life, showing the face of Dr. Lisa Martinez. She was a scientist, not a soldier, but her eyes held the same fear that Jake had seen in veterans coming back from the worst battles. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and there were dark circles under her eyes. "Captain Sullivan, thank God," she said, her voice shaking. "You need to get here now. We've detected something coming into our galaxy, something big." Jake felt his stomach drop. "What kind of something, Doctor?" "Ships," she said, "massive ships. They're unlike anything we've ever seen. They appeared 3 days ago at the edge of our sensor range, and they've been destroying everything in their path. Entire star systems are just ... gone." The bridge fell silent except for the soft beeping of the ship's systems. Jake's crew had fought pirates and rebels, but this sounded different. This sounded like something from a nightmare. "How many ships?" Jake asked. "We count at least 50, but there could be more. They're hard to track because they keep disappearing from our sensors." "Captain, I've been studying space for 20 years, and I've never seen technology like this." Jake nodded grimly. "We're on our way, Doctor. Hold tight." He turned to his crew. "Set course for Omega-7, maximum speed, and send a message to Earth Command. Tell them we may have a situation." As the USS Defiance changed course, Dr. Martinez continued her frantic work at the research station. She had been monitoring deep space for signs of alien life, but she had never expected to find something like this. The readings made no sense. The ships seemed to exist in 2 places at once, their energy signatures shifting and changing like smoke. "Dr. Martinez," called her assistant, Tony Clark, "the new readings are coming in. These ships are not following normal physics." Lisa looked at the data on her screen and felt her heart skip. The ships were moving through space in ways that should have been impossible. They were traveling faster than light without using any known form of propulsion. They were firing weapons that seemed to reach through dimensions. "How long until they reach populated systems?" she asked. Tony's face went pale. At their current speed, maybe 6 hours until they reach the mining colonies, 12 hours until they reach Earth. Meanwhile, in the depths of space, the Kethver Advance Fleet was making its way toward the heart of the Milky Way. To them, this was routine. They had done this same thing hundreds of times before. They would arrive, demand surrender, and when the primitives refused, they would demonstrate their power by destroying a few worlds. Then the rest would submit, and another galaxy would join their empire. War. Commander Zethkal studied the readings from their scouts. The dominant species in this galaxy called themselves humans. They were small, weak creatures with no telepathic abilities and limited technology. Their ships were powered by simple fusion engines, and their weapons were crude projectile throwers and basic energy beams. "This will be easier than the last galaxy," Zethkal told his officers. "The humans have barely learned to travel between stars. They will surrender quickly when they see our power." The Kethver had encountered thousands of different species during their conquests. Some were strong, some were clever, but all of them had one thing in common. They recognized superior force when they saw it. The Kethver had never met a species that would continue fighting when the odds were hopeless. As the USS Defiance raced through space toward the research station, Jake Sullivan stared out at the stars and wondered what they were about to face. He had read the reports from the outer colonies about strange lights in the sky and ships that appeared and disappeared without warning. He had assumed they were dealing with some new kind of pirate or rebel group, but this sounded different. This sounded like first contact with an alien species and not the friendly kind that appeared in old movies. This sounded like war. "Captain," said Commander Mary Johnson from the engineering station, "I've been thinking about what Dr. Martinez said. Ships that can disappear from sensors and weapons that can destroy star systems? What if we're dealing with something beyond our technology level?" Jake nodded. "I've been thinking the same thing. But we're all that's standing between whatever this is and Earth. We have to try." The USS Defiance was a good ship, but it was built for fighting other humans. Its armor was designed to stop missiles and energy beams, not weapons that could erase matter from existence. Its sensors were meant to track ships moving through normal space, not vessels that existed in multiple dimensions. But Jake Sullivan had something that the Kethver had never encountered in their 3,000 years of conquest. He had the stubborn, human refusal to give up, even when the odds were impossible. He had the human ability to fight harder when things looked hopeless. As the ship raced through the darkness toward an enemy they couldn't understand, Jake made a silent promise. Whatever was coming to destroy his galaxy, whatever impossible force was heading toward Earth, he would find a way to stop it. The Kethver had dominated galaxies effortlessly for millennia. They had never lost a battle, never faced true resistance, never met an enemy that refused to surrender. They were about to meet humanity. The mining colony of New Pittsburgh was a quiet place most days. The workers dug deep into the asteroids, pulling out rare metals that Earth needed for building ships and stations. The colony had been there for 30 years, and nothing exciting ever happened. That changed when the sky turned purple. Admiral Corinne Blake was having breakfast in her quarters aboard the battleship USS Phoenix when the alarm started screaming. She dropped her coffee cup and ran to the bridge, her boots echoing in the metal corridors. The Third Fleet had been stationed near New Pittsburgh for routine patrol duty. Nobody expected trouble in this corner of space. "Report," she ordered. As she reached the bridge, "Admiral, we have unknown contacts approaching the mining colony," said Captain Doug Miller, her tactical officer. "They're big and they're moving fast. Nothing like our ships." Corinne looked at the main screen and felt her blood turn cold. The objects coming toward them were enormous, each one the size of a small moon. They moved through space without any visible engines, and they seemed to shimmer like heat waves on a hot day. "How many?" she asked. 12 confirmed, possibly more," Miller replied. "They're not responding to our hails." Corinne had fought in 3 wars during her career, but she had never seen ships like these. They looked wrong somehow, as if they didn't belong in normal space. The metal of their hulls seemed to bend light around it, and strange energy patterns danced across their surfaces. "All ships, battle stations," she ordered. "Form up defensive positions around the colony." The Third Fleet consisted of 15 ships, including 3 battleships, 6 cruisers, and 6 destroyers. They were good ships with experienced crews, but they looked like toys compared to the massive alien vessels approaching them. On the destroyer USS Ranger, Lieutenant Commander Ryan Scott was checking his weapon systems when the first shot came. It wasn't like any weapon he had ever seen. Instead of a beam of energy or a missile, it was like reality itself was being torn apart. The space in front of his ship rippled like water, and then the cruiser USS Boston simply wasn't there anymore. "What the hell was that?" shouted his weapons officer. Ryan didn't have time to answer. More shots were coming, each one making space itself twist and bend. The alien ships were firing weapons that seemed to reach through dimensions, bypassing shields and armor as if they were made of paper. "All ships, evasive maneuvers," Admiral Blake ordered over the com. "Return fire." The human ships opened up with everything they had. Missile after missile streaked toward the alien vessels, followed by beams of concentrated energy that could cut through battleship armor. The weapons struck the alien ships and simply disappeared, passing through their hulls like light through glass. "Our weapons aren't working," Captain Miller reported. "They're not even slowing them down." The alien ships, meanwhile, continued their devastating attack. Ryan watched in horror as the destroyer USS Denver was caught in one of those reality-warping beams. The ship didn't explode or break apart. It simply ceased to exist, leaving only empty space where it had been, War Commander Zethkal observed the battle from his flagship with mild interest. The humans were fighting exactly as he had expected. They formed traditional battle lines, fired conventional weapons, and used predictable tactics. It was the same pattern he had seen in every galaxy they had conquered. "These humans are no different from the others," he told his officers through their mental link. "They rely on primitive projectiles and basic energy weapons. They cannot even perceive our ships properly." The Kethver ships existed partially in normal space and partially in subspace, making them nearly impossible to target with conventional weapons. Their reality-warping cannons could reach through any defense, striking targets that existed in normal space while the Kethver ships remained safely hidden between dimensions. "Shall we offer them surrender terms?" asked his tactical officer. "Not yet," Zethkal replied. "Let them see the futility of resistance first. Destroy half their fleet, then they will listen." Back in the battle, Admiral Blake was running out of options. 5 of her ships had been destroyed, and her weapons were completely useless against the alien vessels. The colony below was defenseless, and there were 30,000 people living there. "Admiral, the aliens are targeting the colony," Captain Miller reported. Karen made a decision that would haunt her for the rest of her life. "All ships, fall back to defensive positions around the colony. We'll use ourselves as shields." The human ships moved between the aliens and the mining colony, knowing they were probably going to die. But they were military officers, and protecting civilians was their job. Even when it meant certain death, Ryan Scott positioned his destroyer directly in the path of an incoming alien beam. The weapon struck his ship and tore through it like a knife through butter. The USS Ranger broke in half, its pieces spinning away into space. Ryan barely made it to an escape pod before the ship's reactor exploded. As his small pod drifted away from the battle, Ryan activated his emergency transmitter. Someone had to warn Earth about what was coming. Someone had to tell them that humanity was facing an enemy unlike anything they had ever imagined. "This is Lieutenant Commander Ryan Scott of the USS Ranger," he said into the transmitter. "The Third Fleet has been destroyed. The alien ships are using weapons that ignore our shields and armor. They can make our ships disappear completely. I repeat, they can make our ships disappear. We need new weapons, new tactics, something. Because what we have isn't working." The battle was over in less than an hour. The alien ships had destroyed 12 of the 15 human vessels without taking any damage themselves. The surviving ships retreated, Carrying news of the disaster back to Earth on the surface of New Pittsburgh, the miners watched in terror as the alien ships descended from the sky. The vessels were so large they blocked out the sun, casting the colony in shadow. Then, without warning, beams of purple light shot down from the ships. The beams didn't destroy the buildings or kill the people. Instead, they seemed to scan everything, recording every detail of human technology and society. The aliens were studying them, learning about them, preparing for a larger conquest. After an hour of scanning, the ships departed as suddenly as they had arrived. They left behind a message, broadcast on all frequencies in perfect English. The voice was cold and mechanical, without any trace of emotion. "Humans of this galaxy," the message said. "You have been evaluated and found to be a primitive species suitable for incorporation into the Kethver Empire. You will surrender all military forces and submit to our authority. Resistance will result in the complete destruction of your species. You have 10 of your days to comply." Back at Research Station Omega 7, Dr. Lisa Martinez was working frantically to understand what had happened. The battle had been broadcast on military channels, and she had watched in horror as the human fleet was destroyed. The alien technology was beyond anything she had studied. "The energy readings don't make sense," she told her assistant Tony Clark. "Their ships are operating on principles that shouldn't be possible. They're existing in multiple dimensions simultaneously." "What does that mean for us?" Tony asked. Lisa stared at the data on her screen. "It means we're fighting an enemy that's thousands of years ahead of us technologically. Our weapons can't hurt them, our shields can't stop them, and our sensors can barely detect them." As news of the disaster spread through human space, panic began to set in. The governments of Earth and the colonies called emergency meetings. Military leaders tried to come up with new strategies, but the truth was becoming clear. Humanity was facing an enemy it couldn't defeat with conventional weapons. Ryan Scott's escape pod was eventually picked up by a rescue ship. His report reached Earth Command within hours, and the message was simple and terrifying. Humanity was about to be conquered by an alien empire that had never known defeat. The Kethver had given humanity 10 days to surrender. As the clock began ticking, scientists and military leaders across human space began working desperately to find some way to fight back. They had to find a weakness in the alien technology, or humanity would join the billions of other species that had fallen to the Kethver Empire. Dr. Martinez continued her analysis, searching for any flaw in the alien ship's design. Somewhere in the data, there had to be something that could help. There had to be a way to fight back, because if there wasn't, the human race had only 9 days left to live as a free species. The emergency meeting room on Earth was packed with the brightest minds humanity had to offer. Scientists, military officers, and engineers sat around a long table covered with papers, computer screens, and empty coffee cups. They had been working for 3 days straight, trying to find a way to fight the Kethver Empire. Dr. Lisa Martinez stood at the front of the room, pointing to a holographic display showing the alien ships. Her eyes were red from lack of sleep, but her voice was steady and determined. "The Kethver ships exist in what we're calling phase space," she explained. "They can shift between our normal dimension and a parallel one, which is why our weapons pass right through them. But there's something interesting about their energy patterns." General Frank Roberts, the head of Earth Defense, leaned forward. "What kind of something?" "Every time they phase shift, they create a small quantum disturbance," Lisa said. "It's like ripples in a pond. If we can create the right frequency, we might be able to force them back into normal space where we can actually hit them." Colonel Pete Williams, the military's top weapons engineer, shook his head. "Even if we can make them solid, our weapons still won't do much damage. Those ships are the size of moons." "That's where human creativity comes in," said Dr. Amy Chun, a quantum physicist who had joined the team. "The Kethver have been conquering galaxies for thousands of years. They've developed tactics for every kind of enemy they've faced, but they've never faced humans. What makes us so special?" asked Admiral Blake, who had survived the disaster at New Pittsburgh. Dr. Chun smiled for the first time in days. We're unpredictable. Every species they've conquered has followed logical patterns. They see superior force, they surrender. They analyze the enemy's strengths, they adapt slowly. But humans don't work that way. We're crazy, added Colonel Williams, with a grin. We do things that don't make sense. We fight when we should run, we take risks that no sane species would take, and we never give up even when the odds are impossible. Captain Jake Sullivan had been listening quietly from the back of the room. His ship, the USS Defiance, was still the most advanced vessel in the human fleet, but it was still just a tiny speck compared to the alien warships. What are you proposing? He asked. Dr. Martinez walked over to another display showing technical diagrams. We call it the Defiance Protocol. We modify your ship with experimental quantum resonance disruptors. These devices should be able to destabilize the Kepler phase-shifting technology. Should be, Jake raised an eyebrow. The theory is sound. Dr. Chen said, but we've never tested it on anything this scale. The disruptors might work perfectly, or they might tear your ship apart from the inside. Jake looked around the room at the faces of Earth's defenders. They were scared, exhausted, and desperate. But they were also determined. They had 6 days left before the Kepler deadline, and this was their only chance. What else does this protocol involve? He asked. Colonel Williams stepped forward. We're also installing neural dampeners throughout your ship. Our analysis of the battle recordings shows that the Kepler use telepathic coordination. If we can block their mind-reading abilities, we might be able to surprise them. Plus, added Dr. Martinez, we're developing new combat tactics based on guerrilla warfare. Instead of fighting them head-on like a traditional naval battle, we hit them fast and hard, then disappear before they can respond. General Roberts stood up. Captain Sullivan, I need to be honest with you. This is a suicide mission. Even if everything works perfectly, you'll be facing hundreds of ships with just one. The chances of survival are practically zero. Jake nodded. I understand, sir. But if we don't try, the chances of humanity surviving are actually zero. At least this way we have a chance. The next 3 days were a blur of activity. The USS Defiance was taken into the secret shipyard orbiting Mars, where teams of engineers worked around the clock to install the experimental modifications. The ship's hull was fitted with quantum resonance disruptors that looked like crystalline spikes growing from the metal. Neural dampeners were installed throughout the ship, creating a field that would block telepathic intrusion. Lieutenant Sam Torres, the ship's tactical officer, supervised the installation of new weapon systems. The traditional missiles and energy beams were replaced with modified quantum torpedoes that could theoretically damage ships in phase space. These weapons are completely untested, he told Jake as they watched the installation. We don't even know if they'll fire properly. Then we'll have to improvise, Jake replied. That's what humans do best. Commander Mary Johnson, the ship's chief engineer, was working on the most dangerous part of the modifications. The ship's engines were being connected to the quantum disruptors, creating a feedback loop that could either give them incredible power or destroy them instantly. The energy levels are way beyond safe limits, she warned Jake. If we push the engines too hard, we could create a quantum explosion that would take out half the solar system. And if we don't push them hard enough, the Kepler will take out all of it, Jake pointed out, while the USS Defiance was being modified. The rest of the crew was training for a type of combat that had never been attempted before. They studied the recordings of the New Pittsburgh battle, looking for any weakness in the alien tactics. The Kepler fight like they're invincible, observed Lieutenant Torres during one training session. They don't take evasive action, they don't use complex maneuvers, they just sit there and blast everything in sight. That's because no one has ever hurt them before, said Dr. Martinez, who had joined the crew as a scientific advisor. They've been the dominant force in the galaxy for so long that they've forgotten how to be careful. So we use that against them, Jake said. We hit them where they don't expect it, in ways they've never seen before. The crew developed new tactics based on the idea that the Kefir would underestimate them. They would use the USS Defiance's smaller size and greater maneuverability to get close to the enemy ships, then use the quantum disruptors to force them into normal space where they could be damaged. "It's like fighting a giant with a slingshot," said Commander Johnson. "We can't match their strength, but we can be faster and smarter." On the 5th day, Lieutenant Commander Ryan Scott arrived at the shipyard. He had been recovering from his injuries, but he insisted on joining the mission. "I've seen what these aliens can do," he told Jake. "I've watched them erase entire ships from existence, but I've also seen something else. When they destroyed the USS Ranger, there was a moment when their weapons flickered. Just for a second, but it was there. What does that mean?" Jake asked. "I think it means their technology isn't perfect," Ryan said. "Maybe their weapons have a recharge time, or maybe they have some kind of limitation we don't understand yet. The point is, they're not completely invincible." Dr. Martinez had been analyzing the data from Ryan's escape pod, and she had found something interesting. "The quantum disturbances we detected aren't random," she said. "They follow a pattern. If we can predict when the Kefir ships will phase shift, we can time our attacks perfectly." As the deadline approached, the USS Defiance was ready for its impossible mission. The ship looked different now, covered in strange crystalline growths, and humming with energy that made the air itself feel charged. The crew had trained until they could operate the new systems in their sleep. Jake stood on the bridge, looking out at the stars. Somewhere out there, the Kefir fleet was waiting. They had conquered 17 galaxies without ever facing real resistance. They had destroyed civilizations that had existed for millions of years. They had turned entire star systems into dust and ash, but they had never faced humanity. They had never encountered a species that would rather die fighting than live in slavery. They had never met people who could look at impossible odds and still find a way to smile. "All stations report ready," Commander Johnson announced. "Quantum disruptors are online," added Lieutenant Torres. "Neural dampeners are active," said Dr. Martinez. Jake took a deep breath. "Then let's go show the Kefir what humans are made of." The USS Defiance left Mars orbit and headed toward the outer system, where the alien fleet was gathering for their final assault on Earth. It was one small ship against hundreds of massive warships, but it carried something the Kefir had never encountered before: the stubborn human. Refusal to give up. The Defiance protocol was about to be tested in the most dangerous way possible. The Titan Nebula was a place of swirling gas and electric storms, where lightning danced between the stars and colors painted the darkness in shades of purple and gold. It was here that the Kefir had chosen to gather their invasion fleet, hidden in the nebula's electromagnetic chaos until they were ready to strike at Earth. War Commander Zethkal stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Dominion, watching as more ships arrived from across the galaxy. 200 massive warships now floated in the nebula, each one carrying the combined technology of conquered civilizations. It was the largest fleet the Kefir had ever assembled, though Zethkal thought it was probably too much force for such a primitive species. "The human deadline expires in 2 hours," his tactical officer reported through their mental link. "Shall we begin the final assault?" Zethkal nodded. "Begin with the outer colonies. Destroy 3 or 4 worlds to show them our power. Then they will surrender quickly." The war commander had done this same thing hundreds of times. Show overwhelming force, destroy a few population centers, and the primitives would give up. It was efficient and predictable. The humans would follow the same pattern as every other species. But as the Kefir fleet began to move toward the edge of the nebula, something unexpected happened. A single small ship appeared on their sensors, moving directly toward them through the electrical storms. "What is that?" Zethkal demanded. "A human vessel," his sensor officer replied. "Just one ship. It appears to be alone." Zethkal felt something he hadn't experienced in centuries: confusion. Why would the humans send a single ship against his entire fleet? It made no tactical sense. Perhaps it was a messenger coming to deliver their surrender. "Scan the vessel," he ordered. The results were puzzling. The human ship was small, no bigger than a Kethver shuttle, but it was generating strange energy patterns that interfered with their sensors. There was something different about this ship, something that didn't match their database of human technology aboard the USS Defiance. Captain Jake Sullivan was watching the alien fleet through the swirling clouds of the nebula. The sight was terrifying and beautiful at the same time. The Kethver ships were arranged in perfect formation, their dark hulls gleaming with weapons that could destroy worlds. 200 ships, Lieutenant Sam Torres reported from his tactical station, each one the size of a small moon. "Any second thoughts, Captain?" asked Commander Mary Johnson from Engineering. Jake looked around at his crew. They all knew this was probably a suicide mission, but nobody looked scared. They looked determined. They looked ready to fight. "No second thoughts," Jake said. "This is what we train for. This is what humanity needs us to do." Dr. Lisa Martinez was monitoring the quantum disruptors from her position at the science station. The experimental devices were working perfectly, creating interference patterns that should disrupt the Kethver phase-shifting technology. "The neural dampeners are active," she reported. "They won't be able to read our thoughts." "Good," Jake said, "because I'm thinking some very unfriendly things about our guests." The USS Defiance moved deeper into the nebula, using the electrical storms to mask their approach. The plan was simple in theory, but incredibly dangerous in practice. They would get close to the Kethver fleet, activate the quantum disruptors, to force the alien ships into normal space, then hit them with everything they had. "Remember," Jake told his crew, "we're not trying to destroy their entire fleet. We just need to hurt them enough to make them think twice about attacking Earth." Lieutenant Torres had his finger on the weapons controls. The modified quantum torpedoes were ready to fire, though nobody knew if they would actually work. The entire plan depended on untested technology and human determination. "Target the command ship," Jake ordered. "If we can take out their leader, maybe the rest will retreat." The USS Defiance burst out of the nebulous storms directly in front of the Kethver fleet. For a moment, both sides were frozen in surprise. The aliens hadn't expected such a bold move, and the humans were stunned by the sheer size of the enemy force. Then the battle began. Jake shouted the order that would change everything. "Activate quantum disruptors. All weapons fire." The crystalline spikes on the Defiance's hull began to glow with brilliant blue light. Waves of quantum energy spread out from the ship, washing over the nearest Kethver vessels. For the first time in 3,000 years, the alien ships were forced completely into normal space. "It's working!" Dr. Martinez shouted. "They can't phase shift." The quantum torpedoes struck the nearest Kethver cruiser, and something amazing happened. The weapons actually damaged the alien ship. Pieces of its crystalline hull broke away, spinning off into space. The Kethver vessel shuddered and began to list to one side. War Commander Zethkel felt a shock run through his mind. One of his ships had been hurt. Actually hurt? In 3 millennia of conquest, no enemy had ever managed to damage a Kethver vessel. "How is this possible?" he demanded. "The human ship is generating some kind of quantum interference," his science officer replied. "It's disrupting our phase shift capabilities." "Then destroy it," Zethkel ordered. "All ships target that vessel." The Kethver fleet opened fire with their reality-warping weapons, but something was wrong. The beams that should have erased the human ship from existence were flickering and unstable. The quantum disruptors were interfering with their weapons too. Jake saw the incoming fire and grinned. "Evasive maneuvers. Show them how humans dance." The USS Defiance spun and twisted through space, dodging the alien weapons with moves that no textbook had ever taught. Jake was flying by instinct now, using the ship's smaller size and greater agility to stay ahead of the massive alien guns. "Their weapons are less effective," Dr. Martinez reported. "The quantum interference is disrupting their targeting systems." "Then let's give them more to worry about," Jake said. "Sam, target their engines. Mary, give me everything the reactor can handle." The USS Defiance dove toward the Kethver flagship, firing quantum torpedoes as fast as the weapons could cycle. Each hit sent shockwaves through the alien vessel. The Eternal Dominion, which had never been damaged in battle, now had scorch marks across its hull. Lieutenant Commander Ryan Scott, manning the secondary weapons station, watched in amazement as their shots actually hurt the enemy. "Captain, we're doing it. We're actually hurting them." But the Kethver were adapting. Zethkal ordered his ships to spread out, reducing the effectiveness of the quantum disruptors. The alien vessels began to phase shift again, though not as smoothly as before. "They're learning," Dr. Martinez warned. "The quantum interference is still affecting them, but they're finding ways to compensate." Jake made a decision that would have been called insane by any military strategist. "All power to engines. We're going to ram them." "Ram them?" Commander Johnson's voice was full of disbelief. "Captain, that's suicide." "Maybe," Jake said, "but it's also the last thing they'll expect. And if we can get close enough, the quantum disruptors will be more effective." The USS Defiance accelerated toward the Kethver flagship at maximum speed. The alien ship tried to phase shift away, but the quantum interference held it in normal space. At the last second, Jake pulled the ship into a sharp turn, raking the alien vessel's hull with weapons fire at point-blank range. The damage was enormous. The Eternal Dominion's main weapons array exploded in a shower of sparks and debris. For the first time in his long career, War Commander Zethkal felt something that was completely foreign to him: fear. "Status report," he demanded. "Main weapons are offline," came the reply. "Hull breaches on 17 decks. The quantum interference is preventing repairs." Zethkal stared at the small human ship as it spun away from his flagship. How was this possible? How could one tiny vessel cause so much damage to his invincible fleet? The answer came to him in a moment of terrible clarity. The humans weren't fighting like any species he had encountered before. They weren't using superior technology or overwhelming numbers. They were using something the Kethver had never learned to counter: pure, stubborn determination. "Sir," his tactical officer reported, 17 of our ships have taken damage. The human vessel is still operational." Zethkal looked at the readings on his screens. The human ship should have been destroyed a dozen times over, but it was still fighting. Its hull was cracked and burning, its weapons were damaged, but it refused to die. What kind of species are these humans? He wondered aloud aboard the USS Defiance. The crew was fighting desperately to keep their ship together. The hull was breached in 6 places, the engines were overheating, and half their weapons were offline. But they were still fighting. "Hull integrity at 30%. Commander Johnson reported. "We can't take much more of this." "Then we better make our next shot count," Jake said. "Sam, load the last of the quantum torpedoes. We're going to end this." The USS Defiance, battered and barely holding together, made one final attack run-on the Kethver flagship. The last quantum torpedo struck the alien ship's main reactor, causing a cascade failure that spread through the vessel's power systems. The Eternal Dominion went dark, its weapons silent, its engines dead. "War Commander." Zethkal stood in the darkness of his bridge, finally understanding what his species had never encountered before. The USS Defiance floated in space like a wounded animal, its hull cracked and bleeding atmosphere into the void. Emergency lights flickered through the broken corridors, and the air tasted of smoke and burning metal. But Captain Jake Sullivan still stood on his bridge, blood running down his face from a cut on his forehead, watching the massive Kethver fleet through the static-filled main screen. "Damage report," he said, his voice hoarse from shouting orders during the battle. "Commander." Mary Johnson looked up from her engineering station, her uniform torn and dirty. "Hull breaches on 6 decks. Main engines are at 20% power. Half our weapons are offline. We're running on emergency life support. How long can we stay in the fight?" Jake asked. Mary met his eyes and gave him a small smile. "As long as you need us to, Captain." Across the battlefield, War Commander Zethkal stood in the darkened bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Dominion. Emergency power cast red shadows across the walls, and the smell of burned circuits filled the air. His officers worked frantically to restore systems that had never been damaged before. "Status of the fleet," he demanded. 17 ships damaged, sir," his tactical officer reported. 3 are completely disabled. The human vessel's quantum weapons are unlike anything we've encountered. Zethkal stared at the small human ship on his screen. It should have been destroyed 10 times over, but it was still there, still fighting. For the first time in his 1,000-year military career, he felt something he had never experienced before: uncertainty. "How is this possible?" he asked. "They have 1 ship. We have 200. "The humans are not fighting like the other species," his science officer replied. "They ignore tactical logic. They take risks that should result in their destruction, but somehow they survive." Lieutenant Sam Torres aboard the USS Defiance was trying to get their weapons back online. His hands were shaking from exhaustion and adrenaline, but he kept working. "Captain, I've got the forward torpedo tubes back. We have 3 quantum torpedoes left." "Make them count," Jake said. "Target their command ship's main reactor. If we can take out Zethkal, maybe the rest will think twice about this invasion." Dr. Lisa Martinez was hunched over her science station, watching the quantum disruptor readings. The experimental devices were holding together, but barely. "The disruptors are overheating. We can maintain the interference field for maybe 10 more minutes. Then we finish this in 10 minutes, Jake said. The USS Defiance limped toward the Kethver flagship, its engines stuttering but still pushing the damaged ship forward. The alien vessel tried to phase shift away, but the quantum interference held it in normal space where it could be hurt. War. Commander Zethkal watched the approaching human ship with growing amazement. Its hull was cracked open like a broken egg, atmosphere was streaming from its wounds, and pieces of its armor were falling away. But it was still coming. "They're going to ram us," his tactical officer said, fear creeping into his mental voice. "No," Zethkal replied, suddenly understanding. "They're going to try to board us." It was an insane plan, but that was exactly what made it dangerous. The Kethver had never faced an enemy that would attempt to board their ships. Their vessels were designed to fight at long range, not defend against enemies who got close enough to touch. Jake Sullivan made the announcement that would become legend among human military forces. "All hands, prepare for boarding action. We're going to take their ship." The crew of the USS Defiance looked at each other in shock and then began to grin. They were going to do something that had never been done before. They were going to board a Kethver warship, Lieutenant Commander Ryan. Scott grabbed his sidearm and headed for the airlocks. "Captain, the boarding party is ready." "No," Jake said. "We're all going. If we're going to die, we might as well die fighting on their bridge." The USS Defiance slammed into the side of the Eternal Dominion with a crash that shook both ships. The human vessel's emergency airlocks extended, burning through the alien hull with cutting beams. Then the impossible happened. Humans began pouring into a Kethver warship. The corridors of the Eternal Dominion were built for 12-foot-tall aliens, so the humans looked like children running through a giant's house. But they moved with purpose, their weapons ready, their faces grim with determination. War Commander Zethkal sent his warriors to repel the boarders, but the humans fought like nothing his people had ever seen. They used their smaller size, too. Hide in spaces too small for Kethver soldiers. They set traps using their own damaged equipment. They fought with a ferocity that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than mere training. Jake Sullivan led the charge toward the alien bridge, his crew following him through corridors that looked like they were made of living crystal. The Kethver defenders were stronger and taller, but the humans were faster and more desperate. "They're not just fighting for their lives," Dr. Martinez observed as she helped carry wounded crew members. "They're fighting for their entire species." The battle inside the Eternal Dominion was unlike anything the Kethver had experienced. The humans used tactics that made no sense by military standards but somehow worked. They split up when they should have stayed together. They attacked when they should have retreated. They sacrificed themselves to save others when any logical species would have preserved their own lives, Commander Johnson managed to reach the alien ship's engine room, where she did something that would have been considered impossible. She began to sabotage a Kethver power core using nothing but human tools and determination. "If I can overload their reactor," she explained to Lieutenant Torres over the com, "it'll create a feedback loop through their entire fleet. The quantum interference will amplify the explosion." "Mary, that'll kill us all," Jake said from the bridge corridor. "Maybe," she replied. "But it'll also send a message to every Kethver in the galaxy. It'll tell them that humans don't surrender." War Commander Zethkal finally reached his own bridge, where he found Captain Jake Sullivan waiting for him. The human was battered and bloody, his uniform torn and his weapon damaged, but his eyes burned with a determination that the Kethver had never seen before. "You cannot defeat us," Zethkal said, his voice echoing in the human's mind despite the neural dampeners. "We are the Kethver. We have conquered 17 galaxies." Jake smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. "Yeah, well, you never met humans before." The final confrontation between the two commanders was brief but decisive. Zethkal had superior strength and telepathic abilities, but Jake had something the alien warrior had never encountered: the absolute refusal to give up. When the fight was over, War Commander Zethkal lay on the deck of his own bridge, staring up at the small human who had defeated him. What are you?" he whispered. "We're the species that says no," Jake replied. "We're the ones who fight when fighting is impossible. We're the ones who stand up when everyone else kneels down." Commander Johnson's voice crackled over the com. "Captain, the reactor overload is set. We have 30 seconds. The USS Defiance and the Eternal Dominion were locked together, both ships dying. The human crew gathered on the alien bridge, watching through the viewports as the rest of the Kethver fleet hung in space, unsure what to do. "Send a message to their fleet," Jake ordered. "Tell them that if they want to conquer humanity, they'll have to do it ship by ship, battle by battle, and we'll make them pay for every inch." The reactor explosion lit up the Titan Nebula like a new star. The USS Defiance and the Eternal Dominion vanished in a blast of quantum energy that rippled through space and time. But the explosion did more than destroy two ships. It sent a shockwave through the entire Kethver fleet, damaging 17 more vessels and proving that their technology was not invincible. The surviving Kethver commanders stared at the expanding fireball where their flagship had been. In that moment, they realized something that would change their empire forever. They had finally met a species that would rather die fighting than live in slavery. The message that reached the Kethver High Council was simple and terrifying. They are not like the others. These humans fight with a determination we have never encountered. They destroyed our flagship and killed War Commander Zethkal. Recommend immediate withdrawal and reassessment of invasion plans. For the first time in 3,000 years, the Kethver Empire retreated. Not because they had been defeated by superior technology or overwhelming numbers, but because they had encountered something they didn't understand: the human spirit, back on Earth. The news of the USS Defiance's sacrifice spread through every human colony and station. Captain Jake Sullivan and his crew had given their lives to prove that humanity would not go quietly into the dark. They had shown the galaxy that some species could not be conquered. No matter how impossible the odds, the Kethver would return someday, but when they did, they would face a humanity that had learned the most important lesson of all, that sometimes the greatest victory comes not from winning, but from refusing to lose. The stars burned cold and distant, but they no longer looked empty. They were filled with the promise that somewhere among them, there were still species that would stand up and fight. For their freedom, humanity had announced its presence to the galaxy in the most dramatic way possible.